The champagne cork sprang up into the sky above the morning, blazing like a comet before the thud, dead center on my property. Down below, a group of strangers in trendy sunglasses saluted and cheered, a mob of them standing under an enormous grand opening sign draped across a building that, by all accounts, should not have existed. Just where my horses used to graze, there now stood an enormous luxury resort with swimming pools, tennis courts, valet parking, and Karen, president of the HOA, giggling like she owned the entire goddamn thing. You're maybe wondering how things got so bad, how a group of suburban power-grasping busybodies got together and made my peaceful patch of land a playground for billionaires. And maybe more astonishing, why I didn't put an end to them, why I allowed them to complete the work, then turned the entire operation out from under them for a king's ransom. If you had asked me then what was most important to me, I would have told you without hesitation, the land. No pause, no reconsideration, simply the land. This parcel of Pine Hollow County, through my family for as long as anyone could remember, meant more than soil and sapling. It lived. My grandfather had purchased the initial tract when this town was only a dusty strip with a bait shop. During years of droughts, floods, good crops and bad, it remained ours. There were open pastures, a grove of cottonwoods along the western fence, and a slow, meandering creek running through the middle like silver threads sewing everything together. When my grandfather died, the land skipped over my parents altogether. He'd made arrangements for that as well, and landed directly on me. He knew I'd take up the mantle. I didn't simply reside on this land. I was a part of it. And for a while, it seemed like the world had forgotten to look our way out here. And I was okay with that. The days were plodding, honest, and predictable, until they weren't. The first letter arrived on a Wednesday, stuck between a seed catalog and an advertisement for farm equipment. It was on heavy, scented paper, stamped with gold, some official-sounding rubbish I'd never encountered before. At the top, Notice of Community Integration Initiative. The words sounded innocuous enough, but as soon as I began to read, the hair on the back of my neck stood on end. The Willow Bend Homeowners Association was expanding its reach, it asserted, to better maintain community standards and enhance quality of life for nearby residents. Nearby naturally meant me. I slapped the letter on the kitchen table and attempted to ignore it. Around these parts, people don't take kindly to having their barns color told or their fields told when to be cut. I figured it had to be a mistake, some mix-up or bureaucratic slip. It wasn't. 2 weeks later, a plastic sign appeared staked into the gravel at the foot of my driveway. It flapped in the wind when, proudly announcing, future site of Willow Bend Beautification Project. Phase 1, no permission, no explanation, just a garish blue logo and a dead website link. I dismantled it and tossed it into the burn barrel, but the discomfort lingered. Then the surveyors arrived. Small clusters in orange vests showed up along the property lines, poking around with measuring sticks, taking photos of what appeared to be nothing. When I asked them what they were doing, they grumbled about public record compliance and survey refreshes, then packed up and departed without ever looking me in the eye. 30 days later, I received another letter. This time, it was colder, lawyerly. Notice of minor zoning adjustment, a subtle modification to the charter of the town, just a few sentences of small print that said it all. My land was being changed from agricultural preserve to something that they referred to as a community enhancement zone. I read it 3 times before the implication hit me. Under the new conditions, any so-called improvement that benefited the greater neighborhood could proceed without the landowner's approval, provided enough stakeholders agreed. I recognized a legal trap when I saw one. They were changing the playbook in the middle of the game, so I brought in a lawyer from Elmwood. Tough old cowboy, quick as a whip. He'd wrangled every dirty land grab trick in the book. He filed protests, requested hearings, challenged every procedural loophole he could find, and for a time it seemed as if he might be able to hold the line. The HOA altered the rules in the middle of the game. They met at absurd hours, put announcements on bulletin boards no one monitored, and wedged important information into the back pages of niche local newspapers nobody read. It was a guerrilla war fought in loopholes and legalese, in footnotes and fine print. And no matter how much we fought back, they always seemed to remain just ahead, evading responsibility through loopholes they'd created for themselves. Yet, I persisted. Every day, I made my rounds, patrolling the fence lines, surveying for new survey flags, tearing down unauthorized signs, taking pictures of each violation with my trusty old Nikon. It was no longer just a chore. It was a ritual, a protest. My version of saying, not today, not yet, and sure as hell not without a fight. Then life caught up with me with something I couldn't shake. My brother was marrying, out in Montana, and he wanted me to be his best man. Family's family. I couldn't refuse. Before I left, I filled my neighbor Earl, a grizzled old rancher, on everything. He offered to watch the place. I locked all the gates, put up new no trespassing signs, and hoped 2 weeks wouldn't make a difference in everything. But I was mistaken. As soon as I took the road off and onto the gravel driveway, I knew something had gone wrong. The scent was off, like new concrete and artificial paint. The birds were nowhere to be seen. No crickets anymore. Only the ear-piercing whine of machinery. I rounded the bend and braked so hard my truck skidded. In the place where my pasture once lay, a huge concrete slab stretched across the countryside like a new scar. Steel beams towered towards the sky, covered in plastic tarps bearing the sign, Willow Bend Resort Spa. A crane overshadowed my cottonwoods, their branches roughly sawed off to accommodate a new access road slicing right through my hayfield. The old fences? Destroyed, bulldozed and tossed in shattered heaps along the creek. The creek itself had been choked and routed, forced into a cold, sterile pipe. Nothing like the wandering, living stream it had been. Then some young man in a hard hat walked up to my truck, clipboard in hand, grinning like we were buddies. "Morning, sir," he said, totally disregarding my white-knuckle hold on the steering wheel. "Homeowners will be informed of community benefits soon." I didn't say anything. I just glared at him, at his stupid neon vest, the giant laminated badge hanging from his neck that said Development Liaison. At last, I shifted the truck into reverse and moved slowly backward. I did not trust myself to talk without bashing his clipboard in two. In the house, there was a stack of mail thrust through the slot. Each envelope featured that selfsame smug gold seal. Notice of enhancement commencement, updated development map, invitation to grand opening. Not a single one of them asked for my opinion. Not a single one of them gave me an option. Earl appeared that night, hat in hand, shaken in a manner I'd never seen before. He explained the trucks had arrived 3 days after I'd departed. Bulldozers, legal staff, armed with court documents stamped and signed. They stated the town council had approved the entire operation under the new zoning regulation. When Earl attempted to get in their way, they threatened him with trespassing charges. He told me he attempted to call several times, but nothing came through. I looked at my phone, no missed calls, no voicemails. Later, I'd discover my service had somehow dropped for the full 2 weeks I was away. That evening, I sat on the porch, observing the flash of construction lights blinking across what used to be my house. They shone like a gaudy imitation of stars. Somewhere out in the distance, over the valley, a generator hummed like a dying thing. I recalled my grandfather, his hands creased and calloused, shaping a life out of raw country. I recalled mornings when creek mist would curl up like breath and everything was invincible, holy. And I thought of what they'd taken. This land wasn't lost. It was taken, piece by piece, through lies and loopholes buried beneath layers of half-truths and legal camouflage. They figured I'd give up. Just another name on a list, another holdout who finally gave in. But they were wrong. The next few weeks weren't about healing. They were about surviving. If the resort construction was a nightmare, it was nothing compared to the storm that came next. The Willow Bend HOA, drunk on whatever bogus legal authority they believed they had over my land, launched their next assault. Not with machinery this time, but with 1,000 tiny paper cuts. It began with a notice slapped onto my front door. Violation, unauthorized structures. A $500 fine for an old tool shed that had stood behind the house since 1964. Clearly documented on every zoning map and county record I could dig up. The following day brought another citation. Violation, non-compliant landscaping. A $250 penalty because the pasture grass, ripped apart by their own construction crews, was now labeled invasive vegetation. 2 days after that, fine number 3 landed in my mailbox. Unauthorized signage. Apparently the plywood I'd spray painted with private property, no trespassing, and nailed to the front gate to keep their trucks out violated some signage code they'd conveniently dredged up. They didn't even try to be subtle about it. The construction teams made a point to start their noisiest operations at 4 a.m. sharp, jackhammers, shouting, and floodlights blazing through my bedroom curtains. All day, cement trucks groaned. At night, backup alarms screeched into the darkness. Dust poured off the job site in clouds so thick I was swapping out air filters twice a week just to breathe inside. And then there were the people. Strangers in reflective vests wandered through what little was left of my land, sometimes carrying clipboards, sometimes holding cameras, always pretending they didn't see me watching from the porch. It didn't take long before I found boot prints trampling through my vegetable garden. Deep tire ruts crushed the flower beds my mother had planted years ago. The place that once felt like refuge now resembled a battlefield. At first, I tried to keep up. I logged every fine, took photos of every encroachment, filed formal complaints with the town clerk. But even that route had been compromised. The clerk's office, once grounded in simple, practical country law, had been overrun too. Every complaint I filed triggered the same lifeless auto-response. Thank you for your concerns. Your input will be reviewed in accordance with community enhancement guidelines. I knew exactly what that meant. No one was coming to stop them. If anything was going to change, I'd have to be the one to change it. One night, during a restless walk down by what remained of the creek, something caught my eye. The water shimmered strangely, coated with a greasy, rainbow film that hadn't been there before. I knelt down and filled a jar with the runoff, marking it for testing. The next day, I drove it over to the agricultural college a few towns away. An old friend still ran one of the labs. What came back turned my stomach. High levels of toxic construction waste, paint solvents, chemical sealants, and even trace amounts of heavy metals, lead, mercury. This wasn't just an eyesore, it was criminal. And suddenly, it hit me. This fight wasn't just about my property anymore. It was bigger, much bigger. The final piece of the puzzle came by accident. I was walking past a section of temporary fencing near the work site when I spotted a folder half buried in the dirt. Someone must have dropped it without noticing. Inside were blueprints, signed approval forms, and a stack of official-looking documents related to the resort's construction. But something was off. The environmental impact report, the keystone for any major development approval, was dated 6 months before the HOA even held their so-called feedback meetings. Worse, the report was an obvious fraud. Whole sections had been lifted straight from a shopping center proposal in another county, 3 counties over, in fact. The old coordinates hadn't even been edited out. I went deeper. I compared the listed signatories with state records. The engineer supposedly certifying the report retired 5 years earlier. The environmental consultant, license expired. The community support survey filled with names of people who'd either moved away or, unbelievably, passed away years ago. What they'd built wasn't just a resort. It was a monument to deception. And now I had the receipts, but I knew better than to act impulsively. Sitting at my kitchen table, documents and printed emails fanned out in every direction, I came to a hard truth. They wanted me to fight. They wanted me to blow up too soon, to march into court with half-finished evidence, and to shout my accusations in front of a judge already cozy with their legal team and lose. They were baiting me, and I wasn't going to bite. Not yet. They were relying on me to perform the role, the irate country bumpkin in their script. A obstinate, uncivilized holdover from the past, standing in the way of so-called progress. If I provided them with that, they'd have their victory. So I didn't. Rather, I smiled. I paid the phony fines without protest. I gave friendly waves to the construction workers as they ripped up more of my pasture. I even began attending the newly rescheduled community meetings in the temporary office next to the construction site, quietly sitting in the back row, nodding as Karen Mitchell, the HOA queen of Willowbend, spewed on about harmonious development and rejuvenating common areas. I took it one step further. I volunteered on their committee of beautification, earning their skeptical stares on the board, but shushing them with a courteous smile and humble enthusiasm. Let them think I'd been defeated. Let them think that they'd destroyed me. That was always where they erred. Behind the scenes, I was planning my retaliation. I set up undercover cameras trained on every inch of the ground that I still retained. They caught it all. Unlicensed construction trash discarded into the creek, trespassing crews, and unlicensed cars driving onto my land like a parking lot. I wired the video to auto-upload and store in 3 different secure places, encrypted, hidden, and impenetrable. As they strutted and bragged, I was knee-deep in county land records, searching through 5 years of their deals. What I discovered was garbage. Kickbacks disguised as landscaping contracts, bilked-up maintenance bids delivered to shell companies. And the members of the town council? They weren't naive. They'd been bribed with donations that conveniently coincided with each shady rezoning vote. Then I struck gold. Karen Mitchell wasn't merely a nosy neighbor in Pearls. She was a clandestine partner in Pine Horizon Development LLC, the same company that built the resort. 2 of her board supporters, Rachel Hensley and Doug Fisher, were listed as consultants. The HOA was no citizen watchdog. It was a wrecking crew disguised with red tape, demolishing heritage landowners and profiting on their ruins. With each fresh instance of corruption, my anger intensified, but I kept it buttoned up. I grinned more broadly. I nodded more fervently. I allowed them to think that I had finished fighting, that their cacophony, their fines, their small intimidations had shattered me. The noose was, however, tightening. After dark, I followed money trails, constructed out timelines, charted connections. Every morning I attended their coffee meetups and cleaned litter off of their new walking trails. I listened. I nodded. I allowed them to prattle on about their underhanded bonuses billed as consulting fees, their snide remarks about the stupid hick who didn't know when to quit. I played my role so well that when Karen eventually made the suggestion, so politely, that maybe I should consider moving somewhere more suitable, I smiled and thanked her like she offered me pie. They believed they'd triumph. They assumed I was entombed beneath fines, beneath dust, beneath cement, under 1,000 surface-level smiles. They had no concept that I was digging still, not downward, but upward, towards something they wouldn't anticipate. Then the invitation. Gold-embossed cardstock with the thickness of a bullet stop arrived at my post. Willow Bend Resort and Spa, grand opening celebration, the wording in overly decorative calligraphy. RSVP phone number sparkling at the bottom. Formal dress requested, no children permitted, champagne reception on the patio. The nerve of it was hilarious. They had bulldozed my pasture, dammed up my creek, cut down my grandfather's cottonwoods, poisoned the ground, and now they wanted me to drink champagne while they toasted one another for a job well done. I dropped the invitation on the kitchen counter next to a worn leather folder, my actual ticket to the party. In it was the wild card they never saw coming, an old covenant buried for decades in the county records. The parchment was yellowed and fissured in its smell of ink and damp ground, hence written in flowing cursive and dated 1894. Therein, it gave the original homesteaders rights to their water and land forever, protected from forced subdivision, zoning, reallocation, or condemnation, except by either by direct inheritance or by a fair, voluntary sale. No easements, no forced annexation to municipalities, no exceptions. It was a holdover from an earlier time, an anachronism so ingrained in the legal framework that no developer dollars, no political horse trading could eradicate it without the direct permission of the landowner. And they never got mine. The resort's grand opening materialized like a hallucination designed for the suburban upper class. Valets in matching blazers brushed away shiny SUVs, while cocktail dresses, glittering women teetered across the just-laid cobblestone plaza on sky-high heels. Nearby, a jazz quartet wove brassy notes into the balmy evening air from their spot at the outdoor bar. Waitstaff moved along the throng with trays loaded with bacon-wrapped scallops and hand-tossed flatbreads, all under sparkling fairy lights draped around the immaculate courtyard, once where my wheat had flourished. The flagship was the clubhouse, a bloated behemoth of imitation rock and highly polished timber beams, its doorstep indicated by a gleaming metallic plaque, Willow Bend Resort and Spa, a new standard in community excellence. I stood before it for a good long while, breathing in the combined aromas of high-end perfume and newly poured asphalt, allowing the magnitude of what I was doing to bear down on me. Then I set my shoulders back, straightened my jacket, nothing more than a plain denim jacket over a black t-shirt and dark wash jeans, and walked through the archway, the old covenant clutched tightly under my arm. The security detail hardly gave me a look. Why should they? I was nobody to them, merely another face in the sea of guests. I pushed swiftly, dodging through the cluster of guests to the hub of it all. A raised podium bordered by humongous banners showing the resort's proposed expansion, wellness centers, individual homes, and executive golf course. On the podium was Karen Mitchell, shrouded in a gown that flashed in the light, her blonde hair a helmet of carefully arranged ambition. Tonight, she intoned through the microphone, her voice reeking of mastered humility. We don't merely unveil an improvement, we rejoice at a dream realized, a community built upon vision, tenacity, and cooperation. I moved forward, heads turned as I walked toward the stage, but no one halted me, not yet. I waited until she reached the high point of her speech, the bit about overcoming adversity and maintaining Willow Bend's spirit, before I walked up the steps and touched her lightly on the shoulder. She turned surprised. Her voice, amplified by the mic, had a hard edge. "Excuse me, sir, this is private." "Actually," I replied, deliberately removing the mic from her hand with 2 fingers. "This is public ground." Or it was, at least. A murmur stirred through the crowd, confusion eddying out like wind across tall grass. Karen retreated, her face reddening under its expert makeup. I held aloft the tattered leather folder. "My name is Samuel Holloway," I declared, my voice firm and strong through the public address system. "And this land, every inch of it, is still protected under the Holloway Covenant of 1894. That covenant, recorded with the county, reserves sole rights to the original homesteaders and their heirs. It prohibits the annexation, preempts zoning amendments, and renders null and void any development that has been done without the explicit permission of the landowner. I stood there, letting that register. Local news cameras leaned in towards the stage like flowers to the sun. I smiled to myself. I never sold this land. I never agreed to any rezoning. I never signed off on any development proposal. What you're standing on, your spa, your tennis courts, your overpriced condos, is still private property, and every square foot of it has been built illegally. A collective gasp swept the courtyard. Karen lunged to reclaim the mic, but I easily sidestepped and began pulling out copies of the covenant, tossing them high into the air like handfuls of paper confetti. The pages floated through the crowd, coming to rest in drinks, hairstyles, and across cocktail table. If you require more evidence, I continued, my smile constricting, I invite you to review the public records, the doctored environmental analyses, the fake zoning approvals, and the conveniently missing conflict of interest disclosures of your sweetheart. The instant the sirens howled, everything was different. 2 police cars and a white van sporting the city inspector's seal pulled up to the curb. Behind them rode down a convoy of county office lawyers, some scowling, some with a sparkle in their eyes. They had been waiting for this moment. I had assured that. Karen backed away, her mouth opening and closing like a fish. Doug Fisher, another board member, tried to slip away towards the parking lot, but an officer intercepted him. Rachel Hensley collapsed into a chair, hiding her face in her hands. City inspectors swarmed the site like ants, clipboards clutched in their hands. They took scoops of drainage ditch samples, recorded code infractions, and took photos in all directions. A county commissioner stepped up onto the stage, megaphone in hand, and commanded that all resort operations cease immediately, citing ongoing investigations into zoning scams, environmental infractions, and unlawful construction. The patrons dispersed in all directions. Gowns and well-tailored suits disappeared into the night like cockroaches when the kitchen light is switched on. Crystal glasses shattered on the pavement, knocked over by panicked waiters who dropped their trays in the mayhem. The jazz band ceased playing. The last note hung suspended in the air, the dying breath of a dream. Karen rushed towards me quickly, her heels ringing out in desperation against the stone. "You can't do this," she spat, her voice twisted with desperation. "This is our future, our investment. You're spoiling everything." "No, Karen," I said softly, shoving the leather folder beneath my arm again. "You manage that on your own." Officials spread out behind me, taking paperwork, photographing evidence, and handing out citations as if passing out Halloween candy. I moved off the stage and started walking back across the courtyard. The air was fresher now, not perfumed and asphaltable, but wet from rain and earth. It had the scent of home. I stood beneath the archway, drinking in a final glimpse of the flashing lights and the big illusion disintegrating before my eyes. Greed and pride disintegrating under the raw force of the truth. The fight wasn't finished, not even close. But for the first time in what seemed like an eternity, the tide had turned. And it was lovely. The backlash hit hard and quickly, and for once, it was richly deserved. By dawn, local highways into Willow Bend were clogged with news trucks. Helicopters whirred overhead, snapping aerial shots of half-finished tennis courts, muddy building sites, and a spa already slipping into soft, unprepared ground. Headlines burst throughout the area. Corruption, fraud, ecological disaster. By lunchtime, the national media had picked up the story, waving it like an obscene banner of suburban excess. Willow Bend Resort, constructed upon deception, flashed one chyron. Another declared, Halifax downfall, the demise of a fictional paradise. The sort of media firestorm no upscale development emerges from unscathed. Karen Mitchell resigned as HOA president by early evening. She attempted to spin it as a health-related decision in a wobbly Facebook message that struggled to muster up a handful of pity likes before the comments were closed off. Doug Fisher lawyered up on the same day. Rachel Hensley was last spotted shoving garbage bags full of shredded paper into the trunk of her Volvo as a reporter recorded from the other side of the street. The other members of the board were flying like pigeons sprayed by a garden hose. Their website went black. Their glossy newsletter ceased. Their fabricated cheer was replaced with silence. And my phone? It rang nonstop. Developers, lawyers, PR professionals, a couple of community reps wanting to initiate a dialogue around remedies that benefited all. Once you peeled away the nice words, they were all telling the same thing. They were afraid. Construction was put on hold. Permits were null and void. The environmental destruction alone would take years and millions to repair. And that's only if the EPA hadn't descended with an even more crushing fist. The resort was a DOA project, stranded in its own failure. Each day it stayed incomplete meant more lost income, ballooning debts, and seething investors breathing fire down their necks. They needed a solution now, and I had it. Because while they were out there bulldozing my property and hosting glittering launch parties, I'd been working too. The original homesteader covenant gave me absolute control. No leases, no loopholes, no compromise. If I'd wanted to, I could have ordered them to tear down the whole resort brick by brick at their own expense. I could have taken them to court, tied them up in lawsuits for decades. I could have let the whole place rot. A shell that was half built to turn to dust on their ledgers, draining value until it pulled them down beneath their pride. But where is the pleasure in that? Rather, I offered them something, an alternative that would hurt far more than losing the land. The negotiations were brief and ruthless. Each meeting was held on my terms, under a sagging canopy tent set up on my land, overlooking the skeletal remains of their project. They were forced to sit in the dust and the heat, just as I had, their pressed suits dripping with sweat, their polished shoes sinking into the same ravaged earth they had poisoned. And I watched them faces as I spelled it out. They would buy the land, every inch of it, straight up. No partnerships, no long-term leases, no sneaky clauses, full ownership. And they wouldn't pay market rate, not even a very generous multiple of it. They would pay the real price, what it would cost them to dig themselves out of the hole they dug. I gave them my price without hesitation, $3 billion. The silence that ensued was complete, the sort that pushes against your eardrums. You could have heard a pin drop on the twisted pavement. Naturally, they protested, blustered, threatened lawsuits, bankruptcy, made counteroffers thick with spurious bravado. I let them continue. Sat back, coffee in hand, nodding as if I were actually listening. And then I put down my cards, one by one. The environmental reports revealing toxic chemical runoff, the emails detailing the illegal rezoning tactics, drone footage of tainted soil being dumped straight into the creek. I pushed photos across the table, unauthorized drainage work, rigged community surveys, secret underground utility hookups. I didn't yell, didn't have to. I simply let the weight of evidence do the talking, watched as realization drained the color from their faces, one by one. By the end of the week, they capitulated. The wire cleared Tuesday morning at 9:04 a.m. on the dot. I sat and watched the numbers inch along my laptop screen, zero after zero, like snow falling. My lawyer, a man who'd spent 3 decades fighting bottom feeder builders, literally choked out a laugh when he noticed the amount. "You didn't just win," he declared, shaking his head. "You annihilated." 30 days later, the resort had been sold in pennies on the dollar to a foreign holding company that aimed to tear the property down and convert the grounds into a preservation area. The bank took what remained of the developer's portfolio. Lawsuits burst on the docket like firecrackers. Careers were detonated. Reputations were incinerated. Karen Mitchell's gargantuan house wound up in a foreclosure ad, sandwiched between other hopeless sales. 2 towns over. Doug Fisher disappeared down to Florida. Last I heard, he was peddling timeshares. Rachel Hensley attempted to remake herself as a community engagement expert, but a single Google search crushed that fantasy before it ever left the ground. The Willow Bend HOA dissolved quietly 6 months later. No goodbye note, no statement, just a legal notice due to insurmountable financial and administrative burdens. Their formerly manicured entryways now covered in weeds and silence. And me? I remained. I reconstructed my grandfather's house, not of prefab concrete and plastic siding, but of straight-up timber and stone, as it was meant to be. I allowed the creek to resume its natural course, flowing gently through fields now full of wildflowers rather than construction waste. I seeded cottonwoods along the riverbanks, their roots growing deep, strong, unbreakable, into the earth that no one would ever attempt to pilfer again. I installed a porch on the eastern side of the house, perfectly sized to observe the sunrise splash the valley with gold. And each morning I filled a cup of coffee, laced up my boots, and entered a world that, finally, was mine to command. Where their great entrance used to be, I hung a new sign, plain wood, big black letters, painted by hand, sold, future location of karma. I took a sip of my coffee, watched the steam curl into the cool morning air, and grinned. Some debts don't pay themselves, but some do, and when they do, they're sweeter than any payday loan could ever be.